He was a successful entrepreneur with a big heart.
He was just very business savvy.
He received an award for his services helping the community.
Everybody loved him. Everybody. He was just a spirit you wanted to be around.
And she seemed like the perfect match for his caring spirit.
She was a successful mental health counselor.
He found her unique, found her beautiful.
Their goals for the future were really aligned, and so there was so much more than just a physical connection there.
But a shocking disappearance tears this picture-perfect family apart.
I was calling my dad. The phone was going to voicemail. She's not answering either. None of the kids are answering. Could they have been kidnapped? Could they have been killed?
The search for answers reveals a gruesome discovery.
They lifted up the cover and just dropped it.
The television was on a true crime show at full volume, like a taunt to the police. It was scary.
He never saw this coming.
Or were the warning signs there all along?
I heard something about a divorce.
He was checked out. He was done.
It became very obvious through their communications that they were having an extramarital affair.
Yeah, it's crazy. Just something about her just wasn't right. She been a terror.
Hey, Mickey!
This was diabolical. This was premeditated.
I was just pissed. I was livid. I was angry. The situations that she put us in, just wicked.
It's a sunny spring day in the laid-back Houston suburb of Spring, Texas.
Spring, Texas, that's where you go when you want to escape the city. It's a great place to raise a family.
It's about 30 miles north of Houston proper, and it has a lot of trees, so it gives like a rural vibe, like a suburb vibe.
And unlike its neighboring metropolitan areas, Spring is renowned for its low crime rates.
I would categorize Spring as a relatively safe area. It's very residential.
Spring is a quiet area. You don't hear a whole lot about crime.
But at 6 p.m., one family is beginning to panic.
51-year-old Mickey Willis's family hadn't heard from him in 10 days. He had missed some really important family events, and that just wasn't like him.
So Mickey's father, A.W. Willis, decides to check the rental home where Mickey lives.
The landlord actually went out there with A.W. to get him access to the house.
Thanks again for doing this.
Of course. I just hope he's okay.
But immediately upon opening the front door, it's clear something's wrong.
That's when they smell the foul odor.
We can't go in there. Something's wrong. I'm calling the police.
Yes.
Now, they were really faring the worst.
Police are at the scene within minutes.
So when police got in there, they don't see anything alarming. They don't see clothes thrown everywhere or any scene that would look like there was a disturbance. But what they did notice audibly was that they could hear the TV still playing. So they go up to the room, the bedroom where the TV was playing.
The smell got worse and worse as they made their way up to the bedroom.
The television was on a true crime show at full volume, like a taunt to the police. It was scary.
It looked like there was someone lying under the blanket on the bed.
Officers cautiously approach and are taken aback by what they discover.
They lifted up the cover and just dropped it.
They found Mickey lying on the bed, and he was in an advanced stage of decomposition, so he had been dead for quite a while.
He was literally decomposing and rotting and had flesh flies literally feeding on his body.
We need homicide immediately.
It was like something out of a horror movie. How did this happen to Mickey?
Eric Mickey Willis was known across Texas for his unmatched wit and humor.
My dad was very comical. He just was a jokester. He always laughed, smiled, found some kind of humor in any situation, basically.
He was an amazing father, even though the relationships with the mothers of his children did not work out.
Like, me and my dad, we were really tight. I would, like, talk to him all the time, like, call him on the phone. All the time. Like, whenever I had something good going on, he was the first person I called.
Mickey was also known as a jack of all trades.
My dad has always been an entrepreneur. He was a hardworking man.
He dabbled in the music industry. He raced horses. As a matter of fact, he had 3 award-winning horses.
He was also a certified auto mechanic.
He loved cars. He liked fast cars. So I guess he just liked racing. I guess you can put it like that. Maybe he liked the fast life.
Mickey's most recent endeavor was opening his own demolition company.
His business was pretty successful because of the innovating ideas Mickey brought to the table.
He found a way to smash the trash where he would compact it even tighter to get more trash in one load because you got to pay to dump. He was just very business savvy.
But despite his dedication to the grind, Mickey always went the extra mile when it came to helping others.
He was selfless. He cared about other people. He would volunteer his company's services during Hurricane Harvey, and he always was assisting with the Houston Fire Department, so much so that he received an award from them for his services and how he was helping them and helping the community.
Everybody loved him. Everybody. He was just a spirit you wanted to be around.
So it was never difficult for Mickey to find a date.
He was definitely a ladies' man. He was very handsome, and the ladies were very attracted to him.
You see pictures of him like he was a smooth guy.
He created a lot of relationships with his charm. He had a few other women, but then the next one that we actually Cynthia.
Hey, Mickey, what's your name?
Cynthia.
Cynthia.
He was just really taken aback by her beauty when he met her. He found her unique, found her beautiful.
From the get-go, they both had something to relate to, and that was their desire for a big family.
Actually, I have 4 kids, all girls.
All girls?
Yep.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's a trip, but they're amazing.
I would actually love to be a part of a big family like that.
Oh, really?
Yes.
They quickly found that their goals for the future were really aligned, and so there was so much more than just a physical connection there.
Before long, the couple decided to take the fast track to making their hopes and dreams a reality.
They ended up going to Vegas and eloping there. They didn't even tell us.
And back in Spring, Texas, their union continued to blossom.
Cynthia had a great job. She worked at a local behavioral therapy center.
She was a successful mental health counselor. Her income, combined with Mickey's demolition business, allowed them to live comfortably while continuing to build their family.
Together, they had 3 kids.
But now, Mickey has been found deceased in the couple's bedroom. And based on the state of decomposition, he's been there for quite some time.
At this point, the decomposition was at least 10 days. And this is a gruesome scene.
Detectives turn off the television, which has been eerily projecting a true crime series, and get to work examining Mickey's body.
Despite the advanced state of decomposition, investigators are able to determine how Mickey died. He was shot on the left side of his head behind his ear.
There was a spent casing from a 9mm weapon laying on the pillow next to him. It was fairly obvious that it was an execution-style shooting as he slept.
He never saw this coming.
As shocking as the discovery of Mickey's body is, there's an important question on everyone's mind. Where is Cynthia?
Still no sign of the wife.
After seeing Mickey's body, police are concerned about Cynthia and the children.
The couple lived in the home with their 2 adult children and the youngest son who was about to graduate high school.
Could they have been kidnapped? Could they have been killed?
Police could only hope there weren't going to be multiple victims in this crime.
51-year-old Eric Mickey Willis had a successful demolition business and a large, loving family, with his wife Cynthia by his side.
He was always laughing, joking around. He was just always happy.
However, the house that was once filled with love and laughter is now swarming with police.
Mickey had been fatally shot on the left side of his head, and his body was terribly decomposed.
But where is Mickey's wife, Cynthia?
Still no sign of the wife?
Put out an APB out on the car.
Yes, sir.
All right.
The couple lived in the home with their 2 adult children and the youngest son, who was about to graduate high school.
Could they have been kidnapped? Could they have been killed?
Police only hope there aren't multiple victims in this crime.
When investigators check the doors and windows, they don't find any signs of forced entry.
We had ruled out any type of home invasion, any type of a planned hit from outside.
Whoever did this either had a key to the home or they were let in by somebody.
As investigators put out a bolo for Cynthia Willis and her car, the tragic news of Mickey's death spreads to the rest of the family.
Hey, honey, I gotta tell you something.
Grandfather called me to tell me that they found your dad in the house over there. And I just broke down. Toya called me and she said, they found a body in the house. And I just remember screaming. I just screamed. I just fell on the floor and I just kept screaming that, we waited too late. We waited too late to call and to check.
If we would have pushed the issue a little bit further, could we have found him sooner? It was just so many questions. It was guilt, it was anger. It was a lot of emotions that we were all feeling.
Mr. Willis? I gotta call you back.
A.W. Willis is still reeling from his son's death, but he wants to help investigators in any way that he can.
So when was the last time you talked to him?
A.W. says no one in the family had heard from Mickey for 10 days.
Okay, and do they all live in Houston?
Yes.
My sister Erica, she was pregnant. She had my nephew March 12th, and I was calling my dad, and I was trying to tell him, Erica's in labor. The phone was going to voicemail. In my head, I thought, well, maybe him and the kids and Cynthia took a trip because it was spring break.
So we said, okay, well, let's give it some time. We just kind of started making up things in our head to make us ease ourselves.
But the family's concern escalated the following Monday.
So Monday comes by, and that's when we find out that he didn't show up to work. So we're like, okay, that's kind of odd because he was very hardworking. Like, he worked around the clock. He wouldn't just abandon a job like that.
He had never not shown up for work. I mean, he was just a guy that was faithful for his work.
A.W. says the family's next step was to contact Cynthia.
I dialed the Cynthia number about 11 or 12 times, right after another. Nothing but a voicemail.
He tried calling his grandchildren who still lived in the home, but they weren't answering either.
And I'm concerned about all of them, not just him, because I couldn't reach anybody.
A.W. says that's when the family decided to reach out to Mickey's landlord.
We reached out to the landlord and kind of insisted, like, hey, we want you to go out there, check, and open the house.
Detectives inquire about the relationship between Mickey and Cynthia.
Did he say anything was wrong?
Well, they've been having some domestic problems.
And according to A.W., Mickey seemed to be at the end of his rope.
That's what he told me. He wanted out. And I heard something about a divorce.
He was checked out. He was done.
Detectives in Spring, Texas, investigating the murder of 51-year-old Mickey Willis, are speaking with his devastated father, A.W.
According to Mickey's father, Mickey and his wife Cynthia had been going through a rough patch lately.
Well, they've been having some domestic problems. He put it out, and I heard something about a divorce.
My dad was checked out. He was done.
But did Mickey ever go through with a separation? A.W. doesn't have an answer to that question.
He wasn't sure if his son had filed for divorce, but he knew it had weighed on him heavily.
You know, people tell you things, you don't go off and tell everybody because you don't know the truth.
This was a 30-year relationship that was very rocky, and they would fight quite frequently.
There were issues in Cynthia and Mickey's relationship for years.
You know what it was about?
And that's been for years, you know.
He said they was having problems, but he didn't tell you what kind of problems.
Well, some of the problems they had was so obvious, you know. You could see him being hurt, you know, hit, things of that nature.
Hitting?
A.W. says the fights between Mickey and Cynthia sometimes escalated into physical violence.
He never did. He's been hit. Like
by her?
Yeah.
I've had it, Cynthia.
You don't think I've had it too?
I don't know if they reported it or not. He was trying to protect the girls, you know. He loved the girl, that was his kid. He loved her.
And A.W. says shortly before Mickey went missing, he and his wife got a phone call from Cynthia that made them believe she was trying to mend her relationship with their son.
She called my wife, and she was saying, "But I'm gonna try to do better." And my wife said, "Well, we love you, but you need to try to give your husband respect." And
Cynthia said that she had done a lot of things wrong, but she was trying to do better. She was going to fix things, that she was going to make this marriage work.
But did their marital woes just drive them further and further apart?
Based on what investigators were hearing, they started to wonder if those marriage problems could have driven Cynthia to do something.
Maybe she wasn't another victim in this crime. Maybe she did this.
And I don't think he got the respect from the young lady, and never has, in a sense.
But as police continue searching the entire Houston metropolitan area for Cynthia, detectives make a valuable discovery in Mickey's text messages.
As they go through those phone records, investigators see that Mickey has been communicating with a woman named Jackie Caldwell.
When detectives dig deeper, they uncover near constant communication between the two, starting in the weeks leading up to Mickey's murder.
Jackie was a childhood friend of Mickey. They grew up together and lost contact, but then reconnected.
It became very obvious through their communications that they were having an extramarital affair.
In the text messages, detectives can see that Mickey and Jackie had a date planned for the evening of March 9th.
So she's with him. They're spending time together the night before he gets murdered.
If Mickey was planning to patch things up with Cynthia, did he let Jackie know that night?
Did Mickey go meet with Jackie that night to break things off with her?
To get to the bottom of this, detectives call in Jackie for questioning.
All right, Ms. Caldwell, we need you to be honest with us.
This might be a classic case of a woman scorned.
Detectives investigating the murder of 51-year-old Mickey Willis have just brought his lover, Jackie Caldwell, in for questioning.
Mickey's wife, Cynthia, and their 3 adult children are still missing.
Could Jackie have something to do with it?
Detectives know from reviewing Mickey's text messages that he was on a date with Jackie just hours before he was killed. But according to Mickey's father, Mickey and his wife Cynthia were planning on patching up their relationship.
Did Mickey go meet with Jackie that night to break things off with her?
All right, Ms. Caldwell, we need you to be honest with us.
This might be a classic case of a woman scorned.
But Jackie appears heartbroken by Mickey's death.
She seems genuinely upset that he's gone.
Detectives ask Jackie about the texts they found on Mickey's phone. and she readily admits that they were involved in a romantic relationship.
It's true. I was with him Friday night. We had dinner together.
The last time she saw him was at dinner on March 9th.
Jackie, did something happen that night? Did y'all get into a fight?
Absolutely not.
So there was no mention of a breakup?
Not at all. Him and his wife were the ones breaking up, not us. We were in love.
She told the officers that she loved him, that he was not breaking up with her, but that they were actually planning to go away together after Mickey's divorce.
Jackie says that Mickey was dead set on them being together, that it was only a matter of him filing for divorce and leaving his wife.
It's why we got together for dinner, to celebrate the start of our new relationship. He was finally leaving his wife.
And you have no idea where she is now?
No.
But is Jackie telling the truth?
It became a who's who in this situation, and they had to do some more investigating to determine what really happened.
In their search for answers, investigators turned to Mickey's inner circle of friends.
During the course of their investigation, investigators interviewed one of Mickey's best friends and co-workers named Lamar Banks.
He tells police that he and Mickey have been friends for years. They even worked together in construction.
Sit there, we talk every day, talk all the time.
Because they were so close, Mickey confided in him a number of things that he had not disclosed to anyone else.
He really was in love with Jackie and wanted to divorce Cynthia to start a life with her. According to Lamar, the situation with Cynthia was far worse than anyone realized, even Mickey's close family members.
That's crazy. Just something about her just wasn't right. And she been a terror for the last past 30 years, man, that I've known her.
He witnessed a toxic relationship of constant arguing and a lot of physical assaults that took place where Cynthia was assaulting Mickey.
She swapped him.
But he had no idea how bad it was until one day when he was dropping off Mickey at home.
Thanks for the ride, man. I appreciate it.
We'll see you tomorrow.
All right, we'll get with you.
All right.
Took him home, and we pulled in the driveway. I'm sitting my phone, so I'm there. See somebody come out the corner, y'all.
It was Cynthia, and she had a knife.
Mickey trying to go in the front door, and she come around the side, on the other side of the garage, and she had a butcher knife. And I look, I say, Mickey, blowing the horns at Mickey. I see she come.
Hey, Mickey!
Texas detectives are speaking with Lamar Banks, the best friend of murder victim Eric Mickey Willis.
Lamar said Mickey's relationship with his wife Cynthia had become more and more violent, and Cynthia even came at him with a knife.
Blowing the horns at Mickey. I see she come.
Hey, Mickey!
But it was too late.
When he turned around, man, she hit him. She hit him with that knife in his arm or his shoulder. He said that damn blade come out at the back of his.
So Cynthia stabbed him in the shoulder?
Oh, hell yeah, she done stabbed him, man. She done stabbed him, and hell yeah.
Lamar says he immediately tried to help his friend.
And I was reaching for my pistol in the console. I said, I'm gonna shoot that.
But Mickey told Lamar he didn't need his help.
He said, now. They grabbed him, and they go in the house. And he shut the door.
Mickey was a family man to his core, and he didn't want to do anything that would break up the family.
Mickey was a person that where his kids was more important to him than what Cynthia was doing to him. He was a family man, that's the way he was raised.
At that time, like, he didn't press charges or he didn't want her to go to jail or anything like that.
But once the couple's youngest son was nearing his high school graduation, Mickey was ready for a new life and a new relationship.
He said, this boy here finna get ready to finish school. And I'm done. I'm gone.
It was kind of one of the situations like, I'm just gonna stay with her till these kids get out of here. and graduate and become adults, and then I'll plan my escape.
Never known her to own a gun or anything, have you?
I don't know what Mickey was shot with, but that's what she keep on a gun. You keep that right in her teeth or her purse.
It's a shocking revelation about the esteemed mental health counselor.
With every new discovery, Cynthia looks more and more capable of committing murder, and police are becoming more and more concerned about the welfare of the children.
So they're looking at this and seeing like, okay, there is the capacity that she could also harm her own children. So time is of the essence, and they were really trying hard to find not only Cynthia, but the children.
But they still have no idea where they could be found.
However, when they subpoena Cynthia's cell phone records, investigators finally get a lead on her whereabouts.
So using the GPS information from the cell phones, detectives were able to track down the night of the murder. Cynthia left that home and traveled to a hotel in Spring, Texas.
Not long after, it's tracked to a home in Humble, Texas. That's about 30 miles from the Willis's residence.
Property records show that the home belongs to Cynthia's sister.
Investigators race to the home, fearing the worst, but instead, they're met with relief.
Can I help you?
The couple's 3 kids are safe and sound.
Is your mother, Cynthia, here?
No, why?
Cynthia is nowhere to be found.
Everyone in the home is clearly worried and confused, including Cynthia's sister.
When Cynthia asked to stay with her for a while, she didn't think much of it.
The entire time they've been here, it has been very normal. Very normal.
Did you talk to your sister about what's going on? Where's Eric?
We're not, I assumed either they were, again, separated and left again. And I didn't ask questions. We're not super close.
Cynthia's sister says she was at the house last night, but no one has seen or heard from her since.
And I have not talked to Cynthia.
When detectives reveal that Mickey is now dead, the family members are stunned.
This is the first time hearing about my dad being gone.
Mickey's daughter says the last time she saw him was March 9th, after he was home from his date with Jackie.
My dad got home probably about 12:30, a little after midnight. It was a normal night. My dad came in, he was tired.
You still up?
Yeah, you know how us night owls do.
I talked to him for a little bit, and then he went to his room, we went to sleep.
Good night, sweetheart.
All right, Dad.
Love you.
I love you too.
But early the next morning, her mother seemed panicked.
My mom woke us up Saturday morning and said we were leaving. I don't remember what time, maybe 7, but it was early. She woke us up.
Wake up. Wake up now. We gotta go. What's going on? I'll explain to you later. Come on, we gotta go. We gotta go. Come on.
She didn't give them any options of taking clothing or toothbrushes or anything like that. She rushed them all out of the house and they left.
They just assumed their parents had gotten into another fight, and that's why they were leaving the house.
They argue a lot. I mean, I guess it was getting worse, but we didn't really pay that no mind. It was just our new normal.
What happened then?
She said we were going to her aunt's house. And then we been here ever since. My mom said we couldn't go back home.
But the siblings say that on the night of the murder, none of them heard a gunshot go off.
And you didn't hear any scuffling, you didn't hear any noise?
I didn't.
Between the time you went to bed and she woke you up?
I didn't hear loud, I didn't really hear anything.
Could Cynthia have used the television in the bedroom to drown out any noise?
When the officers got there, the television was on and it was turned up loud. It was true crime stories that were on the TV at the time Mickey was killed. And so you start to wonder, was she trying to acclimate the environment, those others who were in the home, to the sounds of gunshots? Was that part of her plan? And it seems like it was.
Cynthia's youngest son, 17-year-old Eric Jr., echoes his sister's claims.
So he talks about how, everything seemed normal the night before. The next morning, the mother rushes them out of the home.
But he adds another crucial piece of information.
According to Eric, the day after they moved into his aunt's house, his mom made a chilling statement.
She said something really messed up, man.
What did she say?
She said that she hurt him real bad.
She said it was out of self-defense, that Mickey tried to hurt her and she was only protecting herself.
He never thought his mom had hurt his dad so bad that she'd killed him.
I mean, they fight all the time. I just thought it was another fight.
But now Eric Jr. feels confident that his mom is a killer, and his siblings agree.
She killed him. She killed our dad.
Whenever a child gives up that kind of information that implicates one of their own parents in a murder, that's something you have to take seriously.
All three of Cynthia's children agreed to cooperate with the investigation and gave detailed statements.
They've got what they need to put together a murder case on Cynthia.
But they still have to find her.
For Mickey's loved ones, the waiting game is hard to stomach.
I was just pissed. I was livid. I was angry. And it's just like, why can't y'all find this lady? Because where is she and when is she going to jail? I was very, very upset because why are you hiding now?
Finally, on March 24th, police get the tip they've been waiting for.
They get a tip that Cynthia may be at an apartment complex down close to Pearland, Texas, which is further south of downtown.
And fortunately for investigators, the tip pays off.
They pull her over during a traffic stop and they arrest her.
She's taken in without incident.
From there, she's transported to Harris County for an interview with detectives.
When investigators take her in for questioning, what's interesting about this whole dynamic is she is mum. She doesn't say anything. She doesn't admit to anything, confess, but she also doesn't deny.
Instead, after she's read her Miranda rights, she asks for an attorney.
Even without a confession, investigators have what they need to charge Cynthia with first-degree murder.
Cynthia's 3 kids all agreed to testify against their mother in court. That alone was a huge win for prosecutors.
But a tragic twist of fate will turn the case on its head.
Eric Jr. was shot to death in a similar fashion to his father.
He had been murdered 2 weeks before his dad's case went to trial.
Investigators preparing for the murder trial of 48-year-old Cynthia Willis have just learned that one of their key witnesses has been killed.
Eric Jr. was shot to death in a similar fashion to his father.
He had been murdered 2 weeks before his dad's case went to trial.
Everyone's first thought was, did Cynthia have something to do with this?
We were all like, she killed him. Like, that was the first thought, because we knew that he was a key witness.
However, that theory is soon discounted.
It turned out Eric was senselessly killed by a fellow classmate he did not get along with. The young man was sentenced to 50 years in prison.
It's unfortunate that little Eric passed, but he was saved from that trauma of having to testify and in some way.
In August of 2021, nearly 3.5 years after Mickey's death, Cynthia goes on trial for murder.
Based on Cynthia and Mickey's prior domestic violence incidents, prosecutors outline a violent and abusive relationship.
They painted a picture of a very narcissistic person, a controlling person, and a bully.
Over the prior 2 decades, Cynthia proved herself capable of rage and violence time and time again.
She abused him throughout the relationship. She committed an aggravated assault on Mickey by stabbing him in the shoulder. That showed her propensity for violence.
Prosecutors contend that on the day Mickey Willis was murdered, Cynthia's rage finally reached its peak.
They had text messages that proved Cynthia knew Mickey was planning to divorce her and start a new relationship with Jackie.
The most dangerous time for a victim of domestic abuse is when they're trying to leave the relationship.
Her violence and her rage and her anger could not handle the idea of Mickey having the nerve to leave her. She felt like if she couldn't have him, then no one else could.
On the evening of March 9th, Cynthia decided to put her plan in.
So I don't believe that Cynthia snapped. I believe that she thought about this for some time.
This was diabolical. This was premeditated.
She turned up the TV to mask the sound of the gunshot.
Cynthia pulled out the gun and shot him in the back of the head, so he had no idea what was happening.
He didn't have a chance to say goodbye to anybody. And she killed him in a space where you're supposed to feel the most safe, in your bed in your room.
That morning, when the reality of what she'd done began to sink in, Cynthia started to panic.
And that's why she rushed the kids out of the home, didn't really have a game plan. The kids didn't even have clothes or belongings. And it speaks to just how messy the whole situation was.
Prosecutors lay out a convincing argument. However, a shocking curveball threatens to derail the entire case.
Before trial, the couple's daughter gave prosecutors a sworn statement regarding her mother's violent past and the abuse that occurred.
And so we hoped that she would be cooperative on the stand. But then when she took the stand, it was the complete opposite. She started saying, I don't remember, I don't recall, I didn't say that.
We would ask her a question. She would answer it in a way that she apparently thought was favorable to her mother. And I remember points during her testimony when I was fighting back tears in my eyes because you could see a daughter who is trying to stand up for her mother, who is staring daggers at her from counsel table where she's seated.
Prosecutors call out the inconsistencies during cross-examination.
We already had a prior sworn statement from her in our back pocket, and so when she would deny making that prior sworn statement, the statement would come into evidence.
The jury knew. The jury knew she was lying.
And looking back on it now, I realized that that was the day that we won the case.
After a week-long trial, jurors returned with a verdict. They find Cynthia guilty of the murder of her husband.
I remember when they said guilty, Stephanie was sitting next to me, I just grabbed her hand, I started crying. I mean, I hadn't cried many times through that proceeding, and I cried then because we made it.
Watching the trial, I was relieved because a lot of people in these type of situations always have a little bit more sympathy for the woman.
During sentencing, Cynthia continues to profess her innocence.
She took absolutely no responsibility. When she finally had her opportunity to speak on her own behalf, she wanted to try to throw Mickey under the bus.
She said, I was the victim, that Mickey had cheated on her throughout their marriage. She talked about how he hung out with very suspicious people. And so she was just continuing to kind of dog his character and really speak down on him.
Regardless, the jury has little sympathy for the former mental health counselor.
The jury sentenced her to 50 years in prison.
A 50-year sentence for Cynthia means that she will not be eligible for parole until August of 2047. And at that time, she'll be 77 years old. So this pretty much is a life sentence.
Was it enough to say, you know, I feel completely satisfied? No, but, you know, it would do for now.
This was a case, obviously, of domestic violence that got out of hand. There's no question that Cynthia had been physically abusing Mickey all those years.
I mean, this is someone whose job was counseling others about their mental health, and then she turned around and killed her husband. It really shows.
There are crimes that end with an arrest. There are crimes that end with a confession. And then there are the rare cases that refuse to end at all. They linger for decades, surviving every generation of detectives, every advance in forensic science, every promise that justice is only one clue away. They become more than criminal investigations. They become shadows, stretching across time, reminding everyone that sometimes evil walks away unseen. In the winter of 1976, one such shadow fell over Oakland County, Michigan. At first, it did not look like the beginning of a nightmare. There were no warning signs written across the snow-covered streets. No newspaper headlines predicting what was about to happen. The neighborhoods north of Detroit looked exactly as they always had. Quiet subdivisions lined with modest homes. School buses rolling through sleepy intersections every morning. Grocery stores filled with families preparing dinner. Children riding bicycles before sunset, laughing with friends, believing every sidewalk led safely back home. Parents believed it too. Back then, trust was woven into everyday life. A child walking a mile home from school barely attracted a second glance. If someone needed to buy candy, a comic book, or a loaf of bread, they simply walked to the nearest store. It was a different America, one where front doors were often left unlocked during the day and neighbors knew one another by first name. No one imagined that someone was watching. Someone patient. Someone organized. Someone who understood children better than most parents wanted to believe. The first disappearance did not immediately convince investigators that a monster had arrived. Missing children, while terrifying, could still be runaways. They could have wandered into the wrong neighborhood. They could have accepted a ride from someone they knew. Hope always came first. Hope was easier to hold than fear. But hope has a cruel habit of running out. For children would vanish. For families would wait by silent telephones that never rang with good news. For bedrooms would remain untouched, frozen in time, as though their owners had only stepped outside for a few minutes. And somewhere, hidden behind an ordinary face, someone carried on with life as though nothing had happened. Even today, nearly half a century later, investigators cannot say with certainty who committed these murders. There is no convicted killer. No courtroom confession. No final chapter. Only questions. Questions that have survived longer than some of the detectives who first worked the case. Questions that still haunt surviving family members every birthday, every holiday, every anniversary. Questions that continue to echo through the cold files stacked inside police archives. Who took them? Where were they kept? Why were they kept alive for days before they died? Those questions alone would make this case unforgettable. But what truly separated the Oakland County child killer from almost every other child murder investigation was something investigators struggled to explain, something that disturbed even the most experienced homicide detectives. When the children were found, they were clean. Their hair had been washed. Their clothes had been freshly laundered. Some of the clothing appeared neatly pressed. The children had been fed while they were missing. Someone had cared enough to remove dirt from beneath tiny fingernails. Someone had taken the time to bathe them. And then, someone had killed them. That contradiction has never stopped disturbing investigators. Murder is often chaotic. It leaves behind panic, violence, desperation. Yet these scenes suggested something chillingly different. Whoever was responsible displayed patience, control, routine. It was as though compassion had been carefully staged before unimaginable cruelty. The bodies themselves seemed almost prepared. Not displayed with theatrical violence. Not abandoned carelessly. Placed deliberately. Almost respectfully. That illusion of care would become one of the darkest psychological mysteries surrounding the case. Was the killer attempting to erase guilt? Trying to comfort the victims before their deaths? Or creating a fantasy in which murder somehow became an act of control instead of rage? No one knows. Because the only person who truly understands those final hours has never spoken. If that person is even still alive. For years, psychologists attempted to build profiles from fragments. Detectives studied behavioral patterns. Criminal profilers examined every decision made before and after each murder. The victims shared striking similarities. They were close in age. They disappeared while alone. Each was taken from familiar surroundings during ordinary moments of everyday life. No dramatic kidnappings witnessed by crowds. No broken windows. No desperate screams reported by neighbors. Children simply vanished. That detail may be the most frightening of all. Children are naturally cautious around obvious danger. They avoid threatening strangers. They run from people who frighten them. Yet these children appeared to leave without creating scenes, without attracting attention, without giving anyone reason to intervene. How? Did they recognize the person? Did they trust the voice calling them? Did someone flash a badge? Offer help? Promise to drive them home? Or had the killer perfected a method so ordinary that it never seemed dangerous until it was too late? Every possibility is terrifying. Because each one suggests planning rather than impulse. Planning requires preparation. Preparation requires patience. And patience allows evil to hide in plain sight. Long before the media coined dramatic nicknames, before television crews crowded police headquarters, before reward posters covered telephone poles across Michigan, there were only families desperately trying to understand why ordinary afternoons had turned into endless nights. Imagine standing at the front window, convinced your child is simply running late. 5 minutes become 15. 15 become 30. You check with neighbors. You call friends. Someone says they thought they saw your child near the corner store. Another remembers seeing them walking toward the main road. Nothing seems unusual. Not yet. Dinner grows cold. Darkness settles over the neighborhood. Cars begin pulling into driveways. Porch lights switch on one by one. Still no footsteps approach the front door. Still no familiar voice says, "I'm home." The silence changes. It becomes heavier. Harder to ignore. A parent reaches for the telephone. The first police report is filed. From that moment forward, time begins moving differently. Every minute feels measured in heartbeats. Every unexpected phone call sends adrenaline rushing through exhausted bodies. Every knock on the door forces impossible hope against unbearable fear. Families learn to read the expressions on detectives' faces before a single word is spoken. They memorize the sound of reporters asking impossible questions. They discover how quickly strangers become volunteers, and how quickly volunteers run out of places to search. Most people experience missing person posters as photographs taped to walls. Families experience them as promises. Promises that somewhere, someone will recognize a face. Somebody will remember a car. Somebody will notice a detail overlooked yesterday. Most of those promises are never fulfilled. In Oakland County, they would become heartbreakingly familiar. No one knew it then, but an entire community stood at the edge of a story that would redefine childhood safety across America. Parents would soon begin walking children to school. Schools would change dismissal procedures. Police departments would create new public awareness campaigns warning children never to go with strangers. The phrase itself would become part of everyday parenting because of cases like this one. Yet even that lesson carries an uncomfortable truth. Many children who are abducted do not willingly go with frightening strangers. They go with people who appear ordinary. People who smile. People who know exactly which words to say. And somewhere in Oakland County, during those cold months between 1976 and 1977, someone spoke exactly the right words 4 different times. For conversations. For ordinary moments. For children who believed they were only walking home. Never realized they had already taken the last ordinary steps of their lives. The fear did not arrive all at once. It spread quietly, almost politely, like the first snowfall of the season. One family whispered to another that a child was missing. A teacher paused a lesson to remind students not to leave school grounds alone. Clerks at neighborhood stores began recognizing the worried faces of parents who stopped in every afternoon asking the same question. "Have you seen my son? Have you seen my daughter?" Most people answered with the same helpless shake of the head. In those early days, there was still room for optimism. Children had gone missing before and come home safely. Some had run away after arguments with their parents. Others had simply wandered farther than anyone expected. Police officers were trained to balance urgency with patience, because panic could cloud judgment. The first hours of a disappearance were filled with routines, interviewing relatives, checking hospitals, contacting nearby departments, searching parks and vacant lots. Nobody wanted to believe they were dealing with a predator. Because accepting that possibility meant accepting something even more terrifying. If there was a predator, then he was not hunting in dark alleyways. He was hunting ordinary childhood. He was hunting the moments parents considered completely safe. A short walk home. A quick trip to the drugstore. An errand before dinner. The distance between a front porch and a neighborhood corner. Those were not dangerous places. Until they became the last places 4 children were ever seen alive. The mystery surrounding the Oakland County child killer has endured not because investigators lacked determination, but because almost every answer seemed to generate 2 new questions. Why were the children kept alive? Why did the killer wait days before ending their lives? Where were they hidden without attracting attention? Who could maintain such control over terrified children for so long without neighbors noticing anything unusual? And perhaps the most unsettling question of all. Was there only one person involved? Even today, investigators cannot answer that with certainty. Some detectives believed the crimes reflected the behavior of a single, highly organized offender. Others wondered whether more than one individual had participated, pointing to the complexity of the abductions and the careful handling of the victims after death. Over the decades, theories multiplied, each attempting to explain details that never seemed to fit neatly together. The uncertainty became part of the case itself. Every unanswered question left room for speculation. Every missing piece allowed another theory to grow. Some of those theories bordered on the unbelievable. Others seemed disturbingly plausible. But none of them erased one simple fact. 4 children never came home. As the investigation expanded, experienced detectives began noticing patterns that were difficult to ignore. Criminal investigations often depend on finding similarities, tiny threads connecting separate events into a single narrative. Sometimes those threads are obvious. Sometimes they only become visible after months of painstaking work. In Oakland County, those threads were woven through ordinary routines. Each child disappeared while carrying out a completely normal activity. None appeared to have planned to be away for long. None packed belongings. None left messages. Their lives simply stopped. It was as if someone had reached into the middle of an ordinary afternoon and quietly removed them from the world. That image haunted investigators because it suggested extraordinary confidence. Kidnapping a child is an inherently risky crime. There are witnesses, passing cars, curious neighbors, unexpected interruptions. Every second increases the chance of failure. Yet whoever committed these crimes seemed remarkably composed. There was no evidence of frantic violence at the abduction sites. No reports of prolonged struggles. No crowds gathering after hearing screams. The disappearances unfolded with terrifying efficiency. Behavioral experts would later suggest that such control often reflects preparation rather than impulse. An organized offender typically minimizes risk, chooses locations carefully, and approaches victims in ways that reduce resistance. Whether that profile accurately described the Oakland County child killer remains uncertain, but the pattern of the disappearances certainly raised difficult questions. How many times had the killer practiced? How many children had been approached before finding one willing to stop and listen? How many near misses were never reported because nothing actually happened? Predators often rely on probability. They understand that if they repeat the same strategy enough times, eventually someone will trust them. That possibility cast an even darker shadow over the investigation. Because it suggested the crimes visible to police might represent only the successful attempts. The unsuccessful ones may have vanished into memory without anyone recognizing their significance. Imagine a child decades later recalling an encounter that once seemed harmless. A polite stranger asking for directions. Someone requesting help finding a lost dog. A friendly adult offering a ride because the weather had turned cold. The child said no and walked away. The memory faded. Years passed. Only after hearing about the murders did that ordinary conversation begin to feel different. How many stories like that disappeared forever? Nobody knows. The killer left remarkably little physical evidence behind, especially by the standards of modern forensic investigations. Today, crime scenes are examined with technologies that investigators in the 1970s could scarcely imagine. Tiny traces of DNA, microscopic fibers, digital databases, and advanced laboratory techniques routinely connect suspects to crimes. Back then, many of those tools simply did not exist. Investigators relied heavily on witness statements, fingerprints, physical observations, and painstaking interviews. If crucial evidence was overlooked in those first hours, there was often no second chance. That reality continues to frustrate modern detectives who have inherited the case. Evidence collected nearly 50 years ago has been re-examined repeatedly using newer technology. Items once thought insignificant have undergone fresh testing. Biological material has been analyzed with techniques unavailable during the original investigation. Some questions became clearer. Others only deepened. No definitive answer emerged. Cold cases possess a unique cruelty. Unlike active investigations, they exist in two different timelines simultaneously. One timeline belongs to the past, where detectives race against disappearing evidence. The other belongs to the present, where surviving families continue waiting for a telephone call that may never come. The passage of time changes everything except grief. Parents grow older. Siblings become grandparents. Investigators retire. Witnesses die. Buildings are demolished. Roads are widened. Businesses close. Entire neighborhoods transform. Yet the missing answers remain exactly where they were decades earlier. Waiting. The Oakland County child killer case became more than an investigation. It became a wound carried by an entire community. Children who grew up during those years still remember the sudden changes imposed upon everyday life. Freedom disappeared almost overnight. Walking alone became discouraged. Parents insisted on knowing exactly where their children were going and who would be there. Neighborhoods that once felt open began feeling guarded. For many families, innocence did not vanish because they personally knew one of the victims. It vanished because they realized the victims could have been anyone. A different decision. A different street. A different afternoon. That was all it might have taken. There is a chilling randomness to crimes against children that adults struggle to accept. We search desperately for reasons because reasons create the illusion of control. We want to believe danger can be avoided if we make the right choices. But cases like this resist simple explanations. The victims came from different families, different neighborhoods, different daily routines. Yet they shared one heartbreaking similarity. Each believed they were about to continue living an ordinary day. None could have imagined that somewhere nearby, someone had already decided their future. And that is perhaps the most terrifying aspect of this mystery. The killer did not create chaos by forcing entire communities into immediate panic. He created chaos by hiding inside normality. He allowed everyday life to become suspicious. Every unfamiliar car suddenly looked out of place. Every stranger's smile became questionable. Every delayed child sparked fear that had not existed before. Trust itself became another victim. The story you are about to hear is not simply the story of 4 murders. It is the story of how one unknown offender transformed an entire region, reshaped the way parents raised their children, challenged generations of investigators, and left behind a mystery that still refuses to surrender its secrets. Because before there were suspects, before there were theories, before newspapers coined unforgettable headlines, there were simply 4 children living ordinary lives, completely unaware that history would remember their names for the worst possible reason. In the next chapter, before the headlines and before the fear-consumed Oakland County, We step back into that quieter world to understand the place these children called home and the fragile sense of safety that would soon be shattered forever. If you drive through Oakland County today, it is difficult to imagine the weight those roads once carried. Traffic moves steadily past shopping centers and quiet neighborhoods. Children laugh in schoolyards. Families hurry through grocery stores, balancing work, dinner, and ordinary routines. Time has softened the landscape, but it has never erased the memory. Some places hold history in monuments. Others hide it beneath asphalt. The roads where those children once walked still exist. The intersections where parents searched until long after sunset are still there. The parking lots where investigators stood in freezing silence have changed owners, changed buildings, changed generations. Yet the questions remain untouched. Cold cases have an unusual way of surviving because they refuse to stay in the past. Every few years, advances in forensic science ignite new hope. Detectives reopen boxes that have been sealed for decades. Evidence is photographed again under stronger light. Biological samples are tested with techniques that did not exist when disco filled the radio and America believed its suburbs were among the safest places on Earth. Each announcement sparks the same quiet expectation. Maybe this time. Maybe the next laboratory report will identify a name. Maybe someone who remained silent for 50 years will finally decide they cannot carry the secret any longer. Maybe a forgotten witness will remember a single detail that suddenly makes everything fit. But hope, in this case, has always arrived hand in hand with disappointment. The files grow older. The evidence grows more fragile. The people closest to the investigation grow fewer. And still, the identity of the Oakland County child killer remains hidden behind history. There is something deeply unsettling about an unsolved crime. A solved case eventually becomes a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The investigation reaches a courtroom. Evidence is presented. A verdict is read. Families, while never fully healed, are at least given an answer. An unsolved case offers no such ending. It leaves every possibility alive. It forces detectives to live with uncertainty. It forces families to imagine countless versions of what might have happened. It forces the public to confront an uncomfortable reality that sometimes justice does not arrive, no matter how desperately it is pursued. Perhaps that is why this case continues to fascinate investigators, criminologists, psychologists, journalists, and ordinary people decades later. It is not simply because 4 innocent children were murdered. Tragically, history contains many such crimes. It is because every piece of this case seems to resist certainty. The killer demonstrated planning, yet left behind mysteries that suggest contradiction. The victims were cared for in ways that seem impossible to reconcile with the violence that followed. The investigation uncovered thousands of leads, yet none led conclusively to the person responsible. Every answer feels incomplete. Every conclusion leaves another door open. And somewhere within those unanswered questions are 4 families whose lives were permanently divided into 2 chapters. Life before. Life after. There would always be birthdays marked by absence. Holiday dinners with an empty chair no one wanted to acknowledge. Family photographs that could never be updated. Children who remained forever the same age while everyone around them continued growing older. That is the quiet cruelty of crimes against children. Time continues for everyone except the child who was taken. Their classmates become adults. Their younger siblings eventually become older than they ever had the chance to be. Parents spend decades imagining lives that were never lived. Graduations that never happened. Careers never begun. Weddings never celebrated. Grandchildren never born. A murder steals more than a life. It steals an entire future. As you listen to this story, it is worth remembering that the mystery should never overshadow the people at its center. The unknown killer has occupied headlines for decades, earning a name that became infamous across America. But names like Oakland County Child Killer describe only the darkness. They tell us nothing about the children whose lives were interrupted. Nothing about their laughter. Nothing about the arguments they had with siblings. Nothing about the dreams they carried into ordinary afternoons. True crime has a tendency to focus on monsters because monsters create suspense. Yet every monster leaves victims behind. Those victims deserve to be remembered as more than evidence. They were sons. They were daughters. They were classmates. They were friends. They were children who expected to come home. Before we examine the investigation, before we follow detectives through dead ends and unanswered questions, we must first return to the beginning, not to the crimes, but to the lives that existed before them. Because evil is easiest to understand when viewed through the damage it leaves behind. And the damage in Oakland County was measured not only in police reports or forensic evidence, but in empty bedrooms, unanswered prayers, and a generation of parents who would never again watch their children walk away without wondering, if only for a moment, whether they would safely return. This is not merely the story of an unidentified killer. It is the story of innocence interrupted. Of trust quietly broken. Of 4 ordinary children whose final days remain one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. And like every mystery that has endured for nearly half a century, it begins not with the person who committed the crime. But with the lives that crime forever changed. The winter of 1976 settled over southeastern Michigan with a quiet confidence. Snow drifted across rooftops during the night, leaving neighborhoods wrapped in a clean white blanket by morning. Driveways disappeared beneath fresh powder. Mailboxes leaned under thin layers of ice. Bare maple trees stretched dark branches into pale gray skies, their silhouettes standing motionless against the cold. To the people who lived in Oakland County, winter was nothing unusual. Children bundled themselves into thick coats before school, their scarves trailing behind them as they raced through the snow. Fathers woke before sunrise to shovel sidewalks before heading to work at auto plants, machine shops, or office buildings scattered throughout the Detroit metropolitan area. Mothers stood at kitchen counters pouring cereal, packing lunches, reminding sleepy children not to forget gloves or homework. The mornings followed familiar rhythms. A coffee pot hissed softly in the kitchen. A local radio station reported road conditions. The furnace clicked on against the bitter February air. A school bus rounded the corner with its yellow lights flashing through falling snow. Nothing about those ordinary mornings suggested that history was quietly preparing one of America's most haunting unsolved crimes. Oakland County, located just north of Detroit, had become a symbol of suburban success during the 1960s and early 1970s. Families moved there seeking something many believed they had finally found: safety. The streets were lined with modest brick homes, carefully trimmed lawns buried beneath winter frost, neighborhood schools, churches, shopping plazas, and community centers where children spent afternoons playing basketball, joining scout meetings, or watching local sporting events. Neighbors recognized one another's cars. Teachers knew students by name. The owner of the corner drugstore often greeted customers before they even reached the counter. It was the kind of place where routine created comfort. Children walked to school without a second thought. Parents sent sons to buy milk after dinner. Daughters rode bicycles to visit friends just a few blocks away. Freedom, especially for children between 10 and 12 years old, was considered part of growing up. That freedom was built upon trust. Trust in neighbors. Trust in familiar streets. Trust that danger belonged somewhere else. Most parents believed the greatest risks their children faced were scraped knees, arguments with classmates, or getting home a little later than expected. The idea that someone might be carefully watching children as they walked alone through these quiet neighborhoods seemed almost unimaginable. Crime certainly existed. Detroit, only a short drive away, struggled with rising violence during the decade. Newspaper headlines regularly reported robberies, assaults, and homicides inside the city. But Oakland County felt different. People often spoke about Detroit as though it were another world entirely. The suburbs represented distance from those problems. A place where families believed they had escaped uncertainty. The irony would become painfully clear. The greatest threat was not arriving from outside. It was already there. Looking back now, investigators often describe the months before the first disappearance as eerily ordinary. Nothing connected the coming tragedy to any obvious warning signs. There had been no similar string of child abductions in the immediate area that could have prepared law enforcement. No anonymous letters promising violence. No pattern visible enough to alarm the public. Life continued exactly as expected. Children played street hockey until the sun disappeared behind rows of houses. Teenagers gathered at shopping malls that had become social centers for suburban America. Families attended church every Sunday before sharing dinner with relatives. The soundtrack of everyday life was ordinary in every possible way. Garage doors opening after work. Dogs barking behind backyard fences. The distant rumble of freight trains crossing Michigan. Snow crunching beneath winter boots. Television sets glowing behind living room curtains after sunset. Nothing about the atmosphere suggested that somewhere nearby, someone possessed desires too disturbing to imagine. Someone capable of approaching children without raising alarm. Someone patient enough to wait for exactly the right opportunity. Predators rarely announce themselves. That is what makes them predators. They learn routines. They observe habits. They understand human trust better than the people who offer it. Whether the Oakland County child killer had already begun planning long before February 1976 remains unknown. Investigators have never determined when the offender first selected potential victims or whether unsuccessful attempts occurred before the first confirmed abduction. Those unanswered questions remain buried somewhere inside a mind that has never been identified. Yet behavioral experts have often noted one unsettling possibility. The confidence displayed during the abductions did not appear accidental. The children disappeared from familiar environments with remarkable efficiency. There were no prolonged struggles witnessed by neighbors. No widespread reports of desperate cries for help. No dramatic scenes that forced strangers to intervene. That level of control suggested someone who understood how to lower a child's defenses. Perhaps through charm. Perhaps through authority. Perhaps through simple conversation. The method remains one of the greatest mysteries in the case. Children between the ages of 10 and 12 occupy an unusual stage of life. They are old enough to feel independent but still young enough to trust adults who appear friendly or helpful. They have begun making small decisions on their own, walking to nearby stores, visiting classmates, completing errands for their parents. That independence is encouraged because it teaches responsibility. But it also creates brief moments when children stand alone. Moments measured not in hours, but in minutes. A short walk from school. A quick stop at a convenience store. A trip across a parking lot. Most of those moments pass without consequence. For 4 children in Oakland County, they became the final ordinary moments of their lives. Years later, detectives would spread maps across conference tables, marking each disappearance with colored pins. Roads connected neighborhoods like veins across the county. Distances that looked insignificant on paper suddenly carried unimaginable weight. 1 mile. 2 miles. A familiar intersection. A shopping center. A quiet residential street. Every location represented the place where a family's life changed forever. As investigators searched for patterns, another detail slowly emerged. The disappearances clustered around the Woodward Avenue corridor, one of southeastern Michigan's busiest north-south routes. Woodward connected communities throughout the region, making travel between suburbs remarkably easy. Thousands of vehicles used it every day. For most residents, it was simply another road. For investigators, it eventually became something else. A possible hunting ground. Not because every crime occurred directly on the avenue itself, but because the surrounding communities remained closely linked by its traffic flow. Someone familiar with the area could move comfortably between neighborhoods without attracting attention. Someone who knew which roads emptied quickly after dark. Someone who understood where children commonly walked alone. Someone who blended naturally into suburban life. That possibility deeply unsettled detectives. Serial offenders often rely on what criminologists call a comfort zone, a geographic area familiar enough to navigate confidently but broad enough to reduce suspicion. Whether the Oakland County child killer operated according to such a pattern has never been definitively established, but investigators repeatedly returned to the geography of the crimes, hoping the roads themselves might reveal what witnesses could not. The roads remained silent. The neighborhoods revealed nothing. Residents searched their own memories again and again. An unfamiliar van. A strange man. An odd conversation. Anything. Most found nothing. Because whoever committed these crimes may have appeared completely ordinary. That thought frightened people more than any frightening appearance ever could. Evil rarely introduces itself wearing a mask. Sometimes it wears a warm smile. Sometimes it opens a car door. Sometimes it speaks calmly enough that a child never realizes danger has arrived until escape is no longer possible. No parent in Oakland County imagined those possibilities during the first weeks of 1976. Their greatest concern was getting children home before dinner. Making sure homework was finished. Planning birthdays. Preparing for spring after another long Michigan winter. Ordinary families living ordinary lives. Completely unaware that the safety surrounding them was far more fragile than anyone had ever dared to believe. Within a matter of weeks, one family would discover just how quickly an ordinary afternoon could become the beginning of an endless search. And once that search began, nothing in Oakland County would ever feel ordinary again. The first thing fear steals is certainty. Not hope. Not courage. Certainty. Before 1976, parents in Oakland County rarely questioned the small freedoms they gave their children. Independence was considered an important part of growing up. A child who was 10 or 11 years old was expected to know the neighborhood, recognize familiar faces, and make the short walk home without incident. It was almost a rite of passage. Every extra block a child was allowed to walk alone represented another step toward adulthood. Nobody considered those moments dangerous. If a mother realized she had forgotten a gallon of milk while preparing dinner, she might hand her son a few coins and tell him to walk to the nearest market. If a father needed a newspaper, his daughter might volunteer to ride her bicycle to the drugstore. Children knocked on neighbors' doors without calling first. Friends appeared at each other's houses unannounced. Summer evenings echoed with baseball games played in empty lots until porch lights signaled it was time to come home. That was suburban America. Not perfect. But predictable. Predictability creates a powerful illusion. When the same routine repeats hundreds of times without consequence, people stop imagining the exception. That illusion surrounded Oakland County. Even law enforcement viewed the communities as relatively secure compared to nearby Detroit. Officers spent much of their time responding to property crimes, traffic accidents, domestic disputes, and the occasional violent offense. Child abductions by strangers were extraordinarily rare. Most missing child reports ended with a relieved family discovering their son or daughter at a friend's house, a relative's home, or wandering farther than expected. The possibility that someone might deliberately hunt children across multiple suburban communities barely entered public conversation. It simply wasn't the world people believed they lived in. The county itself reflected the optimism of post-war America. Shopping plazas were expanding. New subdivisions continued to appear as families moved away from the city in search of quieter lives. Churches held community dinners. Little league teams filled baseball diamonds every spring. School concerts packed gymnasiums with proud parents carrying bulky cameras and bouquets of flowers. Children recognized police officers by name. Officers often recognized the children. There was familiarity everywhere. Looking back, that familiarity may have offered the perfect camouflage for someone who understood how trust worked. Because trust does not require certainty. It only requires normality. A familiar street. A familiar tone of voice. A person who doesn't seem out of place. Behavioral analysts have long argued that offenders who successfully target children often rely less on force than on confidence. They create situations that feel ordinary. They reduce the need for violence because violence attracts attention. A calm conversation is quieter than a struggle. Whether that was precisely what happened in Oakland County remains unknown. There were no recordings. No eyewitnesses able to describe those first conversations. Only silence. The silence left behind by children who disappeared before anyone realized something was wrong. As the years passed, investigators reconstructed countless scenarios. They walked the same sidewalks at the same time of day. They measured distances between homes and convenience stores. They stood where the children had last been seen, watching traffic pass, trying to understand what those final moments might have looked like. What they discovered was unsettling in its simplicity. None of the locations felt isolated. Cars passed regularly. Businesses remained open. People moved through the area as part of their daily routines. Whoever approached those children did so in places where ordinary life continued uninterrupted. That required remarkable composure. Imagine stopping a child in broad daylight. Imagine beginning a conversation while other people drive past only a few yards away. Imagine convincing that child to leave without creating enough concern for anyone to remember the encounter clearly. It is a frightening exercise because it demonstrates how little chaos may have accompanied the abductions. No dramatic chase. No shattered windows. No desperate screams echoing through neighborhoods. Just one ordinary interaction. Followed by absence. The absence spread far beyond the 4 families directly affected. Teachers began noticing something had changed inside classrooms. Students who once rushed home after the final bell now lingered, waiting for parents to arrive. School administrators reviewed dismissal procedures. Conversations among adults became noticeably quieter whenever children entered the room. Children sensed the change even when nobody explained it. They noticed parents watching from front windows. They noticed being told to travel in groups. They noticed questions that had never been asked before. Who are you walking home with? What time will you be back? Call as soon as you arrive. For adults, these were precautions. For children, they marked the end of an era they could not yet understand. Fear reshapes routine in subtle ways. Families who once left bicycles in front yards began storing them inside garages. Curtains remained open a little longer each evening while parents waited for children to return. Neighborhood watchfulness intensified. People memorized unfamiliar license plates without realizing they were doing it. A strange vehicle parked too long suddenly attracted attention. An unknown face walking through the subdivision became a topic of discussion. Communities that had once thrived on openness gradually learned suspicion. Yet suspicion alone could not solve the mystery. Law enforcement expanded the investigation with extraordinary determination. Detectives interviewed neighbors, classmates, teachers, store employees, delivery drivers, and anyone who might have crossed paths with the missing children. Thousands of tips arrived by telephone and mail. Most proved unrelated. Some sounded promising for a few days before collapsing under closer examination. Each new lead carried emotional consequences. Families learned not to celebrate too early. A possible sighting in another town. A witness who believed they recognized a child. An anonymous caller claiming to know something important. Hope surged. Then disappeared. Over and over again. One retired investigator would later reflect that the emotional burden of child homicide investigations differs profoundly from almost any other type of case. Adult victims often leave behind complicated lives filled with relationships, financial records, employment histories, and countless investigative directions. Children leave something much smaller. A school desk. A favorite toy. A jacket hanging beside the front door. The evidence becomes intensely personal because childhood itself is personal. Every photograph reminds investigators of the future that was stolen. Every interview with grieving parents carries questions no detective can honestly answer. Did my child suffer? Were they frightened? Did they ask for me? Sometimes the hardest part of an investigation is not the evidence that exists. It is the answers that never can. As winter slowly prepared to give way to spring, no one in Oakland County understood that the story unfolding around them was only beginning. The first disappearance would not remain an isolated tragedy. Instead, it would become the opening chapter of a mystery that would grip an entire nation, redefine the way parents protected their children, and challenge generations of investigators who refused to accept that some killers simply vanish into history. Before the headlines grew larger, before television cameras arrived in force, before the unknown offender earned the name that would forever define the case, there was simply one 12-year-old boy living an ordinary Sunday, making a decision so small that no one could have imagined it would become one of the most heartbreaking moments in the history of Oakland County. The next chapter begins with that boy, his family, and a walk home that should have taken only a few minutes, but instead became the beginning of a mystery that has never truly ended. There is a moment that exists in almost every family's memory. A child stands at the front door, one hand on the knob, already halfway into the next adventure. A parent calls out one last reminder. Be careful. Don't be late. See you in a little while. Most of the time those words disappear into the rhythm of ordinary life. They are repeated so often that neither the parent nor the child remembers them a day later. But when a child never comes home, those final words become permanent. Parents replay them for the rest of their lives. Could they have said something different? Should they have insisted on walking together? Should they have refused to let their child leave at all? Those questions rarely have answers, yet they survive far longer than the investigation itself. That is one of the cruelest realities surrounding the Oakland County child killer case. Every family would eventually become trapped inside a memory they could never change. Long before the county became known across America for one of the nation's most haunting unsolved child murder investigations, it was simply a place where ordinary people believed tomorrow would look very much like today. Children planned birthday parties. Teachers prepared lesson plans. Parents worried about mortgages, school grades, and the rising price of groceries. Life moved forward through familiar routines. Nobody knew they were standing on the edge of history. History almost never announces itself. It arrives disguised as another ordinary day. Looking back through police files and interviews decades later, one detail appears again and again. Nothing unusual happened before the disappearances. There were no obvious warning signs shared among the families. No threatening letters. No suspicious phone calls. No neighborhood rumors pointing toward a dangerous individual. Everything that would later seem significant became significant only after tragedy had already occurred. That is often how investigators describe hindsight. It gives meaning to details that once seemed invisible. A parked vehicle. A stranger smiling. A child taking a different route home. At the time, none of those moments demanded attention. Only afterward did they begin to feel important. The investigation would eventually consume thousands upon thousands of hours. Detectives built timelines measured down to the minute. They retraced routes through neighborhoods in every season and every weather condition. They interviewed witnesses until memories began overlapping and contradicting one another. They filled filing cabinets with reports, maps, photographs, handwritten notes, and names that led nowhere. Yet all of that work began with something astonishingly simple. A child who failed to arrive home. It is difficult to appreciate how devastating that realization becomes unless you imagine the passage of time from a parent's perspective. At first, there is inconvenience. Then mild concern. Then irritation. Perhaps your child stopped to play with friends. Perhaps they forgot the time. Perhaps they lost track of the afternoon. Then another hour passes. The light outside begins to fade. Dinner sits untouched on the table. The excuses become harder to believe. You call neighbors. You check familiar places. Every answer sounds the same. No, I haven't seen them. The silence begins to feel unnatural. Eventually someone says the words no parent ever wants to hear. We should call the police. From that moment forward, life divides itself forever. Before the phone call. After the phone call. Everything that follows belongs to a different world. Detectives often describe those first hours as a race against time. Every passing minute narrows possibilities. Witnesses leave. Traffic changes. Weather alters physical evidence. Memories begin fading almost immediately, even among honest people doing their best to help. In modern investigations, technology assists that race. Surveillance cameras record streets. Mobile phones leave digital footprints. Electronic transactions create timelines. In 1976, investigators possessed almost none of those advantages. The case depended heavily upon human memory, human observation, human honesty. And human memory, however sincere, is fragile. Ask 10 people to describe the same passing car and you may receive 10 slightly different answers. Ask them several days later, and the differences often become greater. Time quietly edits memory. It removes certainty. It fills gaps with assumption. That reality haunted investigators throughout this case. Because every uncertainty became another obstacle standing between the victims and justice. The passage of nearly 50 years has only magnified those difficulties. Witnesses have grown old. Some have passed away. Businesses have disappeared. Entire neighborhoods have changed. Roads have been widened. Buildings demolished. Parking lots repaved. The physical landscape continued evolving while the mystery remained frozen in time. Yet despite those changes, one truth has never faded. This case is not remembered simply because it remains unsolved. It is remembered because it transformed an entire generation's understanding of childhood safety. Across Oakland County, parents began teaching lessons that had once seemed unnecessary. Never accept rides from strangers. Never walk alone after dark. Always tell someone where you're going. Stay with friends. Trust your instincts. Many of those lessons became standard advice across the United States during the late 1970s and early 1980s. They entered classrooms, public service campaigns, television announcements, and conversations around dinner tables. The fear spread far beyond Michigan. The names of the victims may not be known by every generation today, but the changes their deaths inspired continue to shape childhood even now. That is part of their legacy. A tragic one, but a lasting one. As we begin this journey into one of America's most enduring mysteries, it is important to remember what this story is and what it is not. It is not a tale designed to glorify an unknown killer. It is not an attempt to turn unimaginable suffering into entertainment. It is an effort to understand how 4 ordinary lives became intertwined with one of the most perplexing criminal investigations in American history. Every fact we examine, every theory we explore, every investigative decision we question, ultimately leads back to 4 children who should have grown into adults. For futures that never had the chance to unfold. The mystery begins with the killer. But the story belongs to the victims. And before fear claimed Oakland County. Before investigators filled conference rooms with maps and evidence. Before television reporters broadcast urgent updates into homes across America. There were simply 4 children living ordinary lives in quiet neighborhoods, believing, as every child should, that home was never very far away. That belief would soon be tested in the most unimaginable way. And it all began with a 12-year-old boy named Mark Stebbins, who, on a cold Sunday afternoon in February 1976, asked his mother a simple question. "Can I walk home?" It was the kind of question parents hear every day. The kind of question that should have led to nothing more than a few minutes' walk through familiar streets. Instead, it marked the first known step into a mystery that, nearly half a century later, still has no ending. Before they became names written in police reports, before their photographs appeared on missing person posters, before their stories were repeated in newspapers and investigative files, Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Mihelic, and Timothy King were simply children. They had favorite foods, favorite songs, favorite games. They had small habits that annoyed their parents and made their siblings laugh. They had dreams that, at the time, probably seemed ordinary. A child rarely thinks about the future in the same way adults do. They do not imagine the decades ahead in detail. They do not understand how many birthdays they will celebrate, how many friendships they will make, how many places they will visit. They simply exist in the moment. A school day. A family dinner. A walk to the store. A conversation with a friend. The world is still full of possibilities. That is what makes the Oakland County child killer case so painful to revisit. The victims were not chosen because they were famous. They were not people whose names appeared in history books before tragedy found them. They were ordinary children living ordinary lives. And that ordinary quality is exactly why their stories matter. Because anyone who has ever watched a child leave the house, backpack over one shoulder, promising to return soon, understands the fragile innocence that existed before those disappearances changed everything. The killer took 4 lives. But the loss extended far beyond 4 moments in time. He took future graduations, future friendships, future conversations, future memories that families would never get to create. To understand the true weight of this case, we have to step away from the crime scene photographs and the investigation files. We have to return to who these children were before they became victims. Because before the world knew them as part of a mystery, their families knew them as sons and daughters. Mark Stebbins. The first child connected to the Oakland County child killer investigation was 12-year-old Mark Stebbins. In February 1976, Mark was at an age where childhood and independence existed side by side. He was old enough to want freedom. Old enough to make small decisions for himself. But still young enough that his parents expected him to return home safely. That balance is familiar to many families. A child begins asking for more independence. Can I go by myself? Can I walk there? Can I stay a little longer? Parents gradually loosen their grip, because that is part of watching a child grow. Nobody raises a child expecting to keep them protected forever. The goal is to prepare them for the world. On February 15, 1976, Mark was spending time with his mother and younger brother at an American Legion club in Ferndale, Michigan. It was not an unusual place for a family to be. Community organizations like this were gathering places where people came together for social events, meetings, and local activities. They represented the kind of neighborhood connection that defined the era. Inside, adults talked. People watched events. Families spent time together. For Mark, however, the afternoon eventually became boring. Like many 12-year-old boys, he wanted movement. He wanted to go home. The distance was not frightening. It was familiar. The walk was less than 1.5 miles. A short journey. A route that, under normal circumstances, would have been completely unremarkable. His request was likely the kind of request many parents had heard hundreds of times. A child wanting to leave. A child wanting to get home. A child believing the trip would take only a few minutes. There was no reason to believe otherwise. The neighborhood was familiar. The distance was manageable. The day appeared ordinary. Mark left. And then the ordinary world changed. When Mark did not arrive home, concern slowly replaced expectation. At first, his family may have believed there was a simple explanation. Maybe he stopped somewhere. Maybe he met a friend. Maybe he changed his mind. Children sometimes lose track of time. Parents know this. They know children can become distracted. They know a short walk can become longer when something interesting appears along the way. But as time passed, the explanations became harder to accept. The questions began. Where is he? Who saw him last? Did anyone talk to him? Did anyone notice anything unusual? The search for Mark began with the hope that many missing child investigations begin with. The belief that he would be found. That he would walk through the door. That the fear building inside the family would soon disappear. But Mark never came home. 4 days later, on February 19th, investigators discovered his body in a parking area near an office complex in Southfield. The discovery transformed a missing child case into something far darker. The hope that had carried the family through those first days was replaced by a reality no parent should ever have to face. Their child was gone. And someone had taken him. The details investigators uncovered would later become the first indication that Mark's death was not an isolated tragedy. There were signs that he had not been killed immediately after disappearing. Evidence suggested he had been held for a period of time before his death. His clothing was clean. His body had been washed. The discovery raised questions that investigators would continue asking for decades. Where had Mark been during those missing days? Was he kept somewhere nearby? Was someone watching the search efforts while knowing exactly what had happened? Did the person responsible follow news reports about the investigation? The possibility was terrifying. The killer may have been close enough to observe the panic unfolding. Close enough to see Mark's family searching. Close enough to know the pain he had caused. And yet, there was nothing investigators could immediately connect to a suspect. No name. No face. No clear path forward. Only a child who had disappeared while walking home. The death of Mark Stebbins became the beginning of a nightmare that Oakland County did not yet understand. At the time, nobody knew there would be another victim. Nobody knew that investigators were looking at the first chapter of a series of crimes. Nobody knew that Mark's name would eventually be connected to 3 other children whose lives would end in similarly mysterious circumstances. For his family, however, Mark was never the beginning of a case file. He was a son. A brother. A child whose absence created a permanent emptiness. That emptiness is often difficult for outsiders to understand. People sometimes imagine grief as a moment of overwhelming sadness followed by gradual healing. But losing a child is not a single moment. It is thousands of moments. It is every birthday that arrives. Every holiday. Every family photograph. Every time someone remembers something funny the child once did. Grief returns in ordinary places. A favorite restaurant. A familiar song. A street where a child once walked. A room that remains exactly as it was because changing it feels impossible. For Mark's family, the unanswered questions became part of the grief. If a killer is caught, families may still suffer, but they at least know who caused their pain. They know where responsibility belongs. In Mark's case, that answer never arrived. A faceless person remained responsible for destroying a family. And that person continued living somewhere in the world. That reality is one of the most disturbing elements of the Oakland County child killer case. The person who killed Mark Stebbins did not disappear with him. The person continued breathing, walking through streets, buying groceries, speaking with other people, living an ordinary life while a family carried extraordinary pain. And that possibility would become even more frightening as investigators discovered that Mark was not the only child taken. 10 months later, another family would experience the same unimaginable nightmare. Another child would vanish. Another community would search. Another photograph would appear in newspapers. Her name was Jill Robinson. 10 months passed after the death of Mark Stebbins. For a brief period, life in Oakland County attempted to return to normal. That is what communities do after tragedy. They rebuild routines because routine creates comfort. People return to work. Children return to school. Stores reopen their doors each morning. Families continue celebrating birthdays and holidays, even when the memory of what happened remains just beneath the surface. But the fear never truly disappeared. The disappearance of Mark had left behind a question that nobody wanted to say aloud. Could it happen again? Most people hoped the answer was no. They wanted to believe Mark's death was a terrible, isolated event. A single act of violence committed by someone who would never hurt another child. That belief was easier to live with. Because the alternative was unbearable. The alternative meant a dangerous person was still somewhere nearby. Still unseen. Still capable of taking another child. On December 22, 1976, that fear became reality. The second child connected to the Oakland County child killer investigation was 12-year-old Jill Robinson. Like Mark, Jill was at an age between childhood and adolescence. Old enough to want independence. Old enough to have opinions, emotions, frustrations, and a growing sense of identity. But still young enough to need the protection and guidance of her family. 12 years old is a complicated age. A child begins to see the world differently. They want to be treated as mature. They want their own choices. They begin testing boundaries. Small disagreements with parents become more intense because children are discovering that their feelings matter. And parents, while understanding this growth, still see the child underneath. The little girl who once held their hand crossing the street. The little girl who needed help tying her shoes. The little girl who depended on them for everything. To the outside world, Jill Robinson was another missing child. To her family, she was irreplaceable. The circumstances surrounding Jill's disappearance were different from Mark's. On December 22nd, shortly before Christmas, Jill had an argument with her mother. Like many disagreements between children and parents, it was a moment of emotion. A moment that, under normal circumstances, would have passed. Families argue. Children become upset. Sometimes they leave a room. Sometimes they step outside to cool down. Sometimes they return a short time later. Nobody in that moment could have imagined that this ordinary family conflict would become the last known chapter of Jill's life. After the argument, Jill left home. The exact details of what happened afterward remain part of the mystery. Where did she go? Who did she encounter? Did someone approach her? Did someone know she was vulnerable? Those questions have never been answered. The final moments of a victim's life often become the center of a criminal investigation because detectives are searching for the bridge between normal life and tragedy. The last conversation. The last location. The last person who saw them alive. Those moments become precious evidence. But in Jill's case, the path disappeared quickly. There was no clear witness who could explain where she went after leaving home. No confirmed account of who she met. No single event that revealed the truth. Only absence. The kind of absence every family fears. As Christmas approached, while many homes prepared for celebrations, Jill's family entered a completely different reality. Instead of wrapping presents, they searched. Instead of making holiday plans, they waited for information. Instead of counting down the days until Christmas morning, they counted hours since they had last seen their daughter. The emotional contrast was devastating. Outside, the world continued. Stores were crowded. Families shopped for gifts. Christmas lights decorated houses throughout the neighborhood. People carried bags filled with presents through parking lots. But for the Robinson family, the season had become something else entirely. A reminder of what was missing. Every parent of a missing child experiences a painful conflict between hope and fear. Hope says, "She is still alive." Hope imagines the front door opening. Hope imagines footsteps. Hope imagines an apology for being late. But fear whispers another possibility. The longer a child is gone, the harder it becomes to hold on to certainty. Days become unbearable. Every telephone ring creates a rush of emotion. Every unfamiliar car driving slowly through the neighborhood becomes a reason to look closer. Every stranger's face becomes a question. For 4 days, Jill remained missing. Then, on December 26, 1976, investigators discovered her body near Interstate 75 in Troy, Michigan. The discovery came only days after Christmas. A time normally associated with warmth, family, and celebration. Instead, another Oakland County family received the news that would permanently divide their lives into before and after. Jill was gone. And investigators now faced another horrifying reality. The death of Mark Stebbins had not been an isolated tragedy. There was a connection. A pattern was beginning to emerge. The similarities were impossible to ignore. Another child. Another disappearance. Another carefully handled body. Another family searching for answers. Yet there were also differences. Unlike Mark, Jill had been killed by a gunshot wound. This difference immediately created questions among investigators. Was the same person responsible? Had the killer changed methods? Was there more than one offender? Did the differences indicate multiple perpetrators? Or was the killer simply unpredictable? Criminal investigations depend on patterns, but patterns can be deceptive. A similarity may reveal a connection. A difference may reveal a completely separate crime. Detectives were forced to examine every possibility. At the time, they did not have the luxury of knowing that 2 more children would later be connected to the same case. They were trying to understand events as they unfolded, with limited information and unimaginable pressure. The public was also beginning to realize something terrifying. The children were not disappearing from dangerous places. They were disappearing from ordinary life. That was what made the case so frightening. Jill had not vanished from a remote location. She had not disappeared during some extraordinary event. She was a child living in a normal community during the holiday season. A child whose family believed she would return. The discovery of Jill's body deepened the fear spreading throughout Oakland County. Parents who had previously tried to reassure themselves now faced a terrifying possibility. There might be someone targeting children. The idea changed the atmosphere of the entire region. Conversations shifted. Warnings became more serious. The question was no longer simply, "Where are the missing children?" It became, "Who is taking them?" And perhaps even more frightening, "How close are they?" Because whoever was responsible had managed to move through communities filled with people. They had avoided detection. They had left behind grief but almost no answers. The killer had taken another child and disappeared into the background of everyday life. But the investigation was far from over. Only days after the new year began, while families were still trying to process Jill's death, another child would disappear. Her name was Christine Mihelic. She was only 10 years old. 10-year-old Christine Mihelic was the youngest known victim of the Oakland County child killer. At an age when the world should still have felt simple, Christine was living in that beautiful but fragile space between childhood dependence and growing independence. She was old enough to have her own interests, her own routines, and her own little sense of adventure. But she was still a child who expected the adults around her to keep the world safe. That expectation is something children are born with. They believe home means protection. They believe familiar streets are harmless. They believe that when they walk away for a few minutes, they will always have the chance to walk back. Christine lived with her family in Farmington Hills, Michigan, a suburban community that reflected the same sense of safety found throughout Oakland County during that era. Families lived close together. Children played outside. Neighbors recognized each other's faces. A quick trip to a nearby store was not considered a dangerous decision. It was simply part of growing up. On January 2, 1977, only days after Jill Robinson's body had been discovered, Christine left home to go to a nearby 7-Eleven store. It was the type of errand that would have seemed completely ordinary. A child walking a short distance. A small purchase. A few minutes away. Then back home. There was no reason for anyone to believe it would be different. No reason to imagine that this short trip would become the final journey of her life. The details of Christine's disappearance remain painfully simple. She left. She did not return. And somewhere between those two moments, her childhood ended. For her family, those first hours must have carried the same impossible conflict experienced by every family of a missing child. The mind searches for reasonable explanations. Maybe she stopped to talk with a friend. Maybe she visited a neighbor. Maybe she lost track of time. Maybe she would appear at the front door at any second, embarrassed that everyone had been worried. Parents know children. They know their habits. They know the little distractions that can make a short trip last longer than expected. But parents also know their children well enough to recognize when something is truly wrong. And when the waiting continued, concern turned into fear. The search began. Neighbors looked through nearby streets. Family members checked familiar locations. Police officers started gathering information. The same process that had unfolded months earlier began again. Names. Descriptions. Timelines. Last known sightings. Every missing child investigation begins with fragments. A child was here. Then the child was not. The space between those two facts becomes the center of the investigation. Detectives try to fill that space. Where did the child go? Who saw them? What happened in those missing minutes? But in Christine's case, the answers remained hidden. The community was already shaken by the deaths of Mark Stebbins and Jill Robinson. Now, another child had disappeared. The fear was no longer theoretical. It was becoming a pattern. Parents who had tried to convince themselves that the previous cases were unrelated now had to confront a horrifying possibility. Someone was targeting children. The beginning of 1977 became a period of anxiety throughout Oakland County. Families watched the news closely. Parents shared warnings with one another. The simple freedoms children had enjoyed only months earlier were becoming memories. A walk to the store no longer felt like a harmless adventure. It felt like a risk. For nearly 3 weeks, Christine's family lived with uncertainty. 3 weeks of hoping. 3 weeks of searching. 3 weeks of imagining every possible explanation except the one they feared most. That is the cruelty of missing person cases. The unknown can sometimes feel more painful than certainty. Because uncertainty allows hope to survive. Hope can be comforting. But hope can also become exhausting. Every day without answers creates another emotional battle. Should the family believe their child is still alive? Should they prepare themselves for devastating news? There is no way to win that battle. Only to endure it. On January 21, 1977, the waiting ended. A postal worker discovered Christine's body in Franklin, Michigan. The discovery confirmed what investigators had begun to fear. This was not a series of unrelated tragedies. The similarities between the cases were becoming impossible to dismiss. Another child. Another disappearance. Another body carefully placed after death. Another family permanently changed. Investigators examining Christine's case found details that disturbed them deeply. Like the previous victims, she appeared to have been kept alive for a period of time. She had been cleaned. Her clothing had been washed. Her body had been arranged carefully. These details suggested something beyond a sudden act of violence. The person responsible appeared to have spent time with the victims before killing them. That realization created a new level of horror for investigators. Because it meant the killer was not simply taking lives. The killer was controlling the final moments before death. What happened during those missing days? Where were the children kept? Who had access to them? How could someone hold a child for days without anyone noticing? These questions became central to the investigation. The discovery of Christine's body also intensified the search for connections between the victims. Mark Stebbins. Jill Robinson. Christine Mihelic. 3 children. 3 families. 3 tragedies. The similarities suggested one offender. The differences created uncertainty. And uncertainty is dangerous in criminal investigations because it divides attention. Detectives must consider every possibility. A single killer. Multiple killers. A person acting alone. A group of people involved in different ways. Every theory requires evidence. And evidence was exactly what investigators struggled to find. Christine's death also changed the emotional landscape of the community. Before, some parents could still tell themselves that the danger might have passed. After 3 children disappeared within less than a year, that illusion was gone. Oakland County was afraid. Children who once walked freely through neighborhoods were now watched closely. Parents stood outside schools waiting. Neighbors looked more carefully at unfamiliar vehicles. The phrase stranger danger became more than a warning. It became a reality shaping daily life. But even as fear spread, investigators continued searching for answers. They studied every detail, every piece of evidence, every possible connection. And still, the person responsible remained hidden. The killer had taken 3 children. 3 times, the offender had entered the lives of ordinary families. 3 times, the offender had disappeared afterward. But the nightmare was not finished. 2 months later, another child would vanish. Another family would experience the same unbearable waiting. Another community search would begin. His name was Timothy King. He was 11 years old. And his disappearance would become the final known case connected to the Oakland County child killer. By the time spring approached in 1977, Oakland County was no longer the same place it had been a year earlier. The snow was beginning to disappear from the streets. The frozen sidewalks that had covered neighborhoods for months were slowly giving way to wet pavement and patches of brown grass. The long Michigan winter was finally weakening, and families were preparing for the familiar signs of a new season. But beneath the surface, something had changed permanently. The county was carrying a fear that had no name yet. Parents looked twice at unfamiliar vehicles. Children were reminded again and again to stay close, to be careful, to tell someone where they were going. The simple freedom that had defined childhood only a year earlier had become something many families were afraid to give back. 3 children had disappeared. 3 families had received devastating news. 3 times, investigators had followed the same painful pattern. A child vanished. A community searched. Hope faded. A body was found. And the person responsible disappeared. By March 1977, detectives were under enormous pressure. The public wanted answers. Families wanted answers. And somewhere beyond the reach of the investigation, the person responsible for the murders remained unknown. Then, on March 16, another child disappeared. His name was Timothy King. He was 11 years old. And like the children before him, he was doing something completely ordinary. Something so normal that nobody could have imagined it would become the final moment of his childhood. Timothy was the kind of child who represented exactly what the killer appeared to target. Young. Trusting. Independent enough to move through the neighborhood alone. But still very much a child. He lived with his family in Birmingham, Michigan, a community known for its quiet residential streets, schools, and suburban atmosphere. Birmingham, like many areas of Oakland County, carried the same belief that shaped the entire region. This was a safe place. A place where children could walk short distances. A place where neighbors looked out for one another. A place where parents could believe their children would return from simple errands. Timothy was not setting out on a dangerous journey that evening. He was not leaving for an unknown destination. He was simply going to buy candy. A small childhood pleasure. A few coins. A quick trip. The kind of thing millions of children had done before him. That evening, Timothy asked his sister for 30 cents. The amount was small. The request was ordinary. There was nothing unusual about wanting a treat after dinner. Nothing about the moment suggested that it would become one of the most important pieces of an investigation that would last decades. Around 8:30 p.m., Timothy left for a nearby store. The evening was already dark. The streets were quieter than they had been during the day. Windows glowed with the warm light of families inside their homes. Cars passed occasionally. The world continued moving. And somewhere in those ordinary surroundings, Timothy disappeared. The details of those final moments remain one of the most haunting parts of the case. He was not taken from a remote location. He was not walking through an abandoned area. He was moving through a community where people lived their daily lives. That was what made the disappearance so terrifying. A child could vanish in the middle of normal life. When Timothy did not return, his family immediately knew something was wrong. By this point, Oakland County had already experienced 3 child disappearances linked to horrifying discoveries. The fear that had surrounded the previous cases was no longer distant. It was immediate. Personal. Everyone understood what another missing child could mean. The search began quickly. Family members looked for Timothy. Neighbors joined. Police were contacted. The community mobilized. But beneath every search effort was a thought nobody wanted to speak aloud. Was this happening again? The possibility was unbearable. Because if Timothy was connected to the previous victims, then the person responsible had not stopped. The killer had returned. The investigation entered another desperate race against time. Detectives collected information about Timothy's movements. Who had seen him? Where had he walked? What route did he take? Had anyone noticed a strange person or vehicle nearby? As with the earlier cases, investigators faced the same terrifying absence. There was no clear witness. No obvious struggle. No moment when someone saw danger approaching. Only a child who left home and never came back. For Timothy's family, the waiting began. The kind of waiting that changes the way time feels. Minutes become unbearable. Hours become impossible. Every sound outside creates a reaction. A car door closing. Footsteps on the sidewalk. A telephone ringing. Every possibility carries both hope and fear. Maybe this is the call. Maybe someone found him. Maybe he is coming home. But missing children cases are cruel because hope and fear exist together. A family can believe their child is alive while preparing themselves for the worst. They can imagine a happy reunion while knowing the statistics are becoming more painful with every passing hour. Timothy's disappearance received enormous attention. By this point, the Oakland County cases had already captured national interest. The public was watching. The media was reporting. Parents across Michigan were frightened. And Timothy's mother made an emotional public appeal, asking for her son to be returned. It was a mother's desperate attempt to reach whoever might have taken him. Not through threats. Not through anger. Through humanity. She wanted the person responsible to remember that Timothy was not a name on television. He was a child. He was loved. He was someone whose family was waiting. That appeal represented something deeply human in the middle of an investigation filled with darkness. The belief that perhaps the person responsible still had enough conscience to stop. Enough compassion to return a child. But no answer came. No call. No message. No sign that Timothy would come home. 6 days after his disappearance, the search ended in the same heartbreaking way the previous searches had ended. Timothy King was found dead in Livonia, Michigan. Another family lost a child. Another community faced grief. And investigators were forced to confront a devastating reality. 4 children had now been taken. 4 children had been killed. And the person responsible had escaped. The pattern was complete. The Oakland County child killer had claimed another victim. But Timothy's case would also become the moment when investigators fully understood the nature of the threat they were facing. Because the details surrounding his disappearance and death revealed something deeply disturbing. The offender was not acting randomly. The crimes showed preparation. Control. A repeated behavior pattern. The killer appeared to know exactly what they were doing. And after 4 children, the question was no longer whether these crimes were connected. The question was, who could do this? And how had they managed to remain invisible? The disappearance of Timothy King was different from the previous cases in one devastating way. By March 1977, investigators were no longer searching for a missing child in isolation. They were searching for a child in the shadow of 3 murders. Everyone involved understood the terrifying possibility from the beginning. If Timothy was connected to Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, and Christine Mihelic, then the person responsible was still active. Still capable. Still somewhere in the community. That knowledge changed everything. A missing child investigation is always a race against time. But when detectives believe a repeat offender may be involved, every second carries a different weight. They are not only searching for one child. They are trying to prevent another tragedy from happening. Every unfamiliar vehicle became a potential clue. Every stranger became a possible suspect. Every report from the public had to be considered. The investigation expanded rapidly. Police officers searched neighborhoods. Volunteers walked roadsides. Helicopters and search teams covered areas where Timothy might have been taken. The public responded with a mixture of fear and determination. People wanted to help. They wanted to believe that somewhere, someone had seen something. A face. A vehicle. A moment that seemed insignificant at the time but could finally reveal the truth. But the most frustrating aspect of the Oakland County child killer investigation was that the crimes appeared to happen in plain sight without leaving behind the kind of evidence investigators desperately needed. There was no dramatic confrontation. No witness who could point directly toward the offender. No person who could say, "I saw Timothy get into that car." Instead, detectives were left reconstructing a disappearance from fragments. A child was here. Then he was gone. Everything between those moments had to be discovered. The location where Timothy was last seen became a place of intense focus. Investigators returned again and again, examining the surroundings from every angle. They studied possible routes. They interviewed people who had been nearby. They considered every possibility. Had Timothy been followed? Had someone approached him? Had he known the person? Had the offender used deception rather than force? These questions were not only about Timothy. They were about all 4 victims. Because by this point, investigators were beginning to understand that the killer's greatest weapon may not have been violence. It may have been trust. Children are taught to recognize danger. They are taught to fear people who look threatening. But the most dangerous individuals are often those who understand how to appear harmless. A friendly voice. A believable story. A reason to stop. A reason to listen. For investigators studying the Oakland County crimes, the absence of witnesses suggested that the offender may have possessed an ability to create moments that looked completely normal to everyone watching. That possibility was deeply unsettling. Because it meant the killer did not need darkness. Did not need isolation. Did not need a dramatic confrontation. The killer only needed a few minutes. The discovery of Timothy's body brought another wave of grief and anger. For the 4th time, investigators delivered the words no family should ever hear. Their child was dead. For the 4th time, a community gathered around a family experiencing unimaginable loss. And for the 4th time, the offender had left behind questions instead of answers. The similarities between the 4 victims now formed a disturbing picture. Mark Stebbins, Jill Robinson, Christine Mihelic, Timothy King. Different families. Different neighborhoods. Different personalities. But connected by the same nightmare. All were children. All disappeared while alone. All were found after days of uncertainty. And all appeared to have been treated in a way that confused investigators. The killer had not simply abandoned the victims. There appeared to have been a strange ritual of preparation. The children were cleaned. Their clothing was handled carefully. They were left in locations where they would eventually be found. This was not the behavior of someone who acted purely in panic. The offender appeared to have time. Time to make decisions. Time to move the bodies. Time to consider what would happen afterward. Those details changed the direction of the investigation. Detectives were no longer looking only for someone capable of murder. They were looking for someone capable of maintaining control before and after murder. Someone who could return to everyday life after committing unimaginable acts. Someone who could sit among neighbors, co-workers, or acquaintances while knowing exactly what they had done. That psychological contradiction became one of the most disturbing elements of the case. How could someone commit such crimes and continue functioning? How could they interact with other people? How could they wake up every morning and continue living? Those questions would follow investigators for decades. The public reaction after Timothy's death was unlike anything Oakland County had experienced before. The fear that had been growing quietly exploded. Parents who had once allowed their children to walk short distances now reconsidered every decision. Children were warned repeatedly about strangers. Schools increased safety discussions. Community groups organized meetings. The phrase "don't talk to strangers" became more than advice. It became a survival lesson. Across Michigan, parents looked at their own children and imagined the unbearable possibility that it could have been them. Because that was the terrifying reality of the case. The victims were not obviously different from other children. They were not isolated. They were not living in unusual circumstances. They were ordinary children. And that meant the danger felt impossible to predict. Fear spreads fastest when people cannot identify its source. If a dangerous person has a recognizable pattern, people believe they can avoid them. But an unknown offender creates a different kind of fear. A fear without boundaries. A fear that enters every neighborhood, every school, every family conversation. With 4 children murdered, investigators faced one of the largest criminal investigations in Michigan history. The pressure was enormous. The public wanted immediate answers. The families needed justice. The police needed to find a person who had managed to commit 4 horrific crimes while leaving behind very little that clearly identified him. Thousands of tips poured in. Names were suggested. Rumors spread. Suspicious individuals were reported. Some leads appeared promising before collapsing. Others raised new questions without providing answers. Every investigator knew the same thing. Somewhere inside all those pieces was the truth. But finding it would prove far more difficult than anyone expected. Because the Oakland County child killer case was not only about catching a murderer. It was about understanding a person who had managed to hide behind ordinary life. The killer had taken 4 children. But the investigation would now begin searching for something even more elusive. A pattern. A mistake. A weakness. Anything that would reveal the identity of the person who had spent months moving through Oakland County unseen. And as detectives began examining the evidence more closely, they discovered that the offender had left behind a psychological signature. A signature that would become both their greatest clue and their greatest mystery. The most disturbing aspect of the Oakland County child killer case was not simply the fact that 4 children had been murdered. Sadly, history contains many cases where innocent lives are taken by violent offenders. What made this case different was the strange contradiction left behind at every stage. The killer appeared to combine 2 completely opposing behaviors. On one side was violence, the ultimate act of destruction. On the other side was a disturbing display of preparation, patience, control, a careful attention to detail. Investigators looking at the 4 victims began to understand that these crimes were not chaotic moments of rage. The offender did not appear to lose control and act impulsively. Instead, there was evidence of time. Time before the murders. Time after the abductions. Time spent making decisions. That realization changed how law enforcement viewed the person they were hunting. They were not searching for someone who simply committed a terrible act and fled in panic. They were searching for someone who could maintain composure while carrying out a horrifying plan. Someone who could wait. Someone who could hide. Someone who could return to ordinary life afterward. That was the part investigators struggled with most. The person responsible was not a figure from a nightmare story. He was likely someone who walked through the same communities as everyone else. Someone who purchased groceries. Someone who went to work. Someone who exchanged casual conversations with neighbors. Someone who existed in the same world as the families whose lives he destroyed. The idea was almost impossible for many people to accept. Because people naturally want evil to look different. They want danger to announce itself. They want to believe they would recognize it immediately. But the Oakland County child killer case forced people to confront a much darker possibility. Sometimes the person causing unimaginable harm does not look unusual at all. Sometimes they blend in perfectly. After Timothy King's death, investigators began studying the 4 cases together rather than separately. The names of the children were placed side by side. The timelines were compared. The locations were mapped. The evidence was reviewed repeatedly. A picture slowly emerged. The victims were similar in age. They were taken from familiar environments. They disappeared during ordinary moments. And after their deaths, their bodies were handled in a way that suggested a repeated pattern. The offender seemed to have developed a routine. Criminal investigators often search for a signature, the unique behavior an offender repeats because it satisfies some psychological need. A signature is different from a method. A method is how a crime is committed. A signature reveals something about why. In this case, investigators were left wondering about the meaning behind the cleaning and careful placement of the victims. Was the killer trying to convince himself that he was not a monster? Was he creating an illusion of caring? Was the preparation part of a fantasy? Or was there another explanation entirely? No one could know. The only person with those answers remained unidentified. That uncertainty became one of the most frustrating parts of the investigation. Evidence suggested something about the offender's mind, but it could not reveal his name. The investigation also revealed how difficult it is to solve a crime when the victim cannot provide answers. In many homicide cases, victims leave behind clues. A final conversation. A conflict. A message. A relationship. A reason someone might have wanted them harmed. Children often leave behind none of those things. Their lives are simpler. Their worlds are smaller. Their routines are predictable. And that innocence, which should have protected them, also made it harder for investigators to understand why they were chosen. Why these children? Why these neighborhoods? Why this time period? Was there a connection between the families? Investigators examined every possibility. They looked at schools, neighborhoods, activities, family relationships. Nothing provided a complete explanation. The children did not appear connected by anything other than age, location, and the circumstances of their disappearances. That suggested the killer may have been selecting opportunities rather than targeting specific individuals. A terrifying thought. Because if opportunity was the deciding factor, then any child could have been vulnerable. As public fear increased, so did the pressure on law enforcement. The investigation became massive. Multiple police departments became involved. Federal authorities assisted. Thousands of interviews were conducted. Tips arrived from across the country. The case captured national attention because it represented something every parent feared. A stranger who could take a child and disappear. But media attention also created challenges. Every major crime attracts false information. People searching for attention. People convinced they know more than they actually do. People reporting rumors as facts. Investigators had to separate meaningful information from noise. One credible clue could change everything. Hundreds of false leads could waste valuable time. That balance became increasingly difficult as the public demanded progress. Families wanted answers. Reporters wanted updates. Communities wanted reassurance. But investigators could not manufacture evidence. They could only follow what existed. And what existed was incomplete. The fear also changed how children experienced the world. Before these murders, many children in Oakland County had enjoyed a level of independence that now seems almost impossible to imagine. They walked to stores, played outside until evening, visited friends without constant supervision. Afterward, childhood became more restricted. Parents became more cautious. The phrase stranger danger entered everyday conversations. Children were taught rules that generations before them had rarely needed to consider. Do not accept rides. Do not go with someone you do not know. Tell an adult where you are going. Stay with friends. These lessons became part of American childhood. But behind every safety lesson was a painful reminder. They existed because children like Mark, Jill, Christine, and Timothy were no longer there to grow up. For investigators, the most difficult question remained unanswered. Who was capable of this? A person who could approach children. A person who could hold them for days. A person who could commit murder. A person who could disappear afterward. The offender seemed to possess a rare combination of characteristics. The ability to appear trustworthy. The ability to maintain control. The ability to avoid detection. Those qualities made the search incredibly challenging. Because investigators were not looking for someone who stood apart from society. They were looking for someone who had successfully hidden inside it. Every suspect had a life. A job. A family. A history. Every possibility had to be examined carefully. And every mistake could mean the killer remained free. Years later, detectives would still return to the same questions. The questions that began in 1977. The questions that followed every investigator who touched the case. Where did the killer take the children? How did he avoid being seen? Why did he clean them afterward? Was he alone? And most importantly, why was he never caught? The answers remained hidden. But the investigation was only beginning. The next stage would reveal the enormous effort made to identify the person behind the murders. Detectives would follow hundreds of leads. They would investigate suspicious individuals. They would confront disturbing possibilities. And they would experience the frustration of watching promising paths disappear into darkness. Because in the Oakland County child killer case, every road seemed to lead somewhere. Until it suddenly stopped.